Hey everybody, Late Bloomer here, and today we're going to talk about my first love and passion, which is playing bamboo flutes. And I had a bit of a scare a few weeks ago. I just got this Shakuhachi from Yozan in Japan, and it was a great instrument, and before you knew it, I cracked it. And I had cheap Shakuhachis before this. My first one was one from Amazon, and I played that one for about 5 years. And it wasn't that bad of an instrument. It did its job, but it wasn't completely all the way in tune compared to the regular sizes. And of course, it just took a whole different approach to getting some of those notes out. But all in all, it wasn't a bad instrument for what I paid for it off Amazon. It was made in Taiwan. I don't even know the type of bamboo that it was made out of. So fast forward a couple years, and at the end of last year, got a Shakuhachi teacher, and he recommended I get a better flute. And so here it is. And what I didn't know was that, the Madake bamboo, which is traditionally made with shakuhachis, or made for shakuhachis, is really temperamental. And as soon as you take it out of its climate, you got to really take care of that flute, because if you're in a dry place like I am, where it's winter, that flute did not take too well, and it didn't last too long. And so I'll throw the pictures up here. You can see how bad it was. If you can imagine spending a couple $100s on this instrument and then just having it break on you, it's pretty devastating. And so your options are kind of limited. Either you try to fix it, or you ship it all the way across Japan, and so you got to pay for shipping again, and then pay for it to get fixed, and it's just a whole big mess, right? So today we're going to talk about what I did to kind of save my flute and the kind of tools you'll need. So this kind of goes along with any bamboo instrument, or even wood for that matter, woodwind instrument that you're playing, because they all kind of suffer the same problems. Now, bamboo is very, more sensitive than a wooden flute, that you'll see out there. Just bamboo doesn't really do well with expanding and contracting when you blow into it, which happens every time you play it. And so basically what I got here are just some clamps here from the hardware store, some size 20 hose clamps, very important. I got some upholstery nylon, very important as well. This is just a dowel rod that I wrapped with some cloth on it so I could oil the inside of the flute. This is linseed oil and Titebond number 3. And so what's important to know is that most of these items are going to come from either the hardware store or the arts and crafts store. So I had to go to both to get all this stuff. So for the hardware store, you're going to get your hose clamps. You're going to get your regular clamps here. I don't know what you call these things. And Titebond 3 is at the hardware store too. And for the arts and crafts store, you're going to get your dowel rod. You're going to get your upholstery nylon and your linseed oil. And so first, let's talk about what happens when you crack your flute. So once you notice you have a major crack in your flute, you're going to want to take a rag, and you're going to want to soak it in water, and then just lay those rags on top of your flute to get it nice and hydrated. And what you want to do is, as your flute kind of absorbs that moisture, it's going to swell a little bit, and it's going to help fill the cracks out. And so once you hydrate the flute with the wet towels, and I did that for about a day, then I moved on to start coating the flute in oil. Not the inside yet, but just the outside. So I coated the whole flute in oil, especially where the cracks are. I poured oil in the cracks, and I just let it sit for another day. And then, trying to think what was next. I know the whole time I was clamping the flute and going back and forth and trying to get it right. And it's funny because when I clamped the flute with these two clamps and kind of squished it together the first time, heard a crazy loud crack, and I thought that I completely ruined the flute, but it looks like I ended up cracking it on another spot in the back. So this flute has two major cracks in it. The first crack that you see in the picture, that was major. So that was that crack is actually on the inside of the flute. You can see it. If you try to look inside, you can see the crack kind of split down. And the second crack didn't go as deep. But all in all, we got pretty lucky, because that crack didn't come right here in the center line, or the center of the flute where the utaguchi is. And so this is kind of that edge that gives you that tone. And if that were to get damaged, I think we would have lost the flute. But anyway, so we got the wet rags, we threw that on the flute, then we oiled the outside of the flute, all while keeping it clamped. And then it was time to start putting the glue on it, and then that's where you want to put your glue. And I like the Titebond 3, and you don't want to use super glue. So the Titebond 3 glue is good because it dries slow. So that allows you to kind of put glue in the crack, squeeze all the glue out of it, clean it up, and then try again. So what I did was I put kind of several layers of glue in the crack. So I would put glue in the crack, I would put the clamps back on, squeeze all the glue out, clean it up, put more glue on, and then I would like take a sponge with the kind of abrasive side to it, that double-sided sponge, and I would just kind of scrape away some of the glue on the outside so I didn't have that rough feeling, when you have dry glue. But anyway, because Titebond 3 takes such a long time to dry, and it takes about, not like a couple days, it takes about a half an hour, then of course over 12 hours is when it fully dries. But yeah, because you have that long dry time, it really makes it easy to clean up any excess glue or any spills just with a little bit of water. So highly recommend the Titebond 3 wood glue. And linseed oil, that's a whole other story. So I know a lot of people use almond oil or grapeseed oil, even olive oil. For flutes, I kind of fully switched over to linseed recently, only because it just lasts longer. Your food oils like almond and grapeseed, they do a great job with bamboo and wood instruments, but the oil is gonna evaporate. And with linseed oil, the oil is going to stay on the flute longer, so it doesn't make the flute like super oily as far as like, am I going to get grease on my hands every time I play it? But the instrument's going to absorb that oil and it's going to stay there longer, unlike the other flute oils that kind of disappear every couple months, like the almond and the grapeseed. So linseed oil was great. I love using that. And trying to think what else have we got here. Yeah, and I think for the hose clamps here, I'll show you pictures of those too. Those were really handy after I put the glue on and had the flute oiled. All that stuff was done. Just having the hose clamps in there just to hold it together was important. And the most important part was trying to wrap the flute up in the upholstery nylon. So for your bamboo and wooden instruments, it's always good to wrap them in some kind of tight thread. And a thin nylon thread is going to be great. I'm going to put some links in the description that shows you how to tie this exactly, but it's not easy and it is tricky. And you'll be tempted to use a thicker thread to try to wrap the flute, but you don't want to fall in that trap, because a lot of this red binding got loose as soon as I was done tying it. And I think it was more so the binding. It wasn't the way it could have been how I tied it. But I've tied another flute with a little bit thick, with the same kind of thickness of string, and it didn't hold, and it held much better. But I think that this type of thread here, the red thread, is not good at all. It would start to come apart as soon as I cut it with scissors. So I think that's kind of let me know that it probably wasn't me tying it. It was just the type of thread that I got. So I got that thread at the construction store, and like I said, I don't think it's good for binding, but you want to get this upholstery nylon. The thinner the better, because it'll wrap tighter as you try to get that flute bound. And what that does, of course, is it kind of stops the flute from expanding so much where it's going to crack. Yeah, so I think that's all I really had to say today, is that if you have a major crack in your shakuhachi, don't give up on it yet. Don't freak out. Get some clamps, get the hose clamps, get the linseed oil, get your wet rags. And like I said, first put the wet rags on the flute, then start to oil the flute, then start gluing the outside of the crack. And then a lot of people, they say this is blasphemous, but I actually put oil on the inside of the flute. And I did that for a lot of different reasons. If you have a crack on the inside, you have your warm breath going inside the instrument, possibly going inside the crack and expanding the flute from those fissures. And I didn't want that at all. So, and I also couldn't glue the inside of the flute like that. So I think the best thing that I could do was at least oil the inside, let oil get inside of that crack. So if my breath does enter those cracks, the bamboo is going to be moist, and if it expands, it can expand easily. The problem with these instruments is that they expand when they're dry, and that's what causes the cracks. So keep the flute hydrated, so when it does expand, it can take those expansions, and then when it contracts, it can contract with no problem. So the whole thing is just keeping these instruments nice and moist, nice and hydrated, so they can withstand the contractions and expansions going back and forth. Yeah, so use these tips, and hopefully you'll be okay. And this whole process took like 4 days, so don't think that if you had a damage like I did, don't think that it's going to be fine in a couple hours. It took several days of just letting the flute just kind of sit and soak and get, you know, as moist as possible before I went to the next step. And there you go. So if you have a problem with your expensive flute that you want to keep for your entire life, don't freak out yet. Try these methods and see if they work. See you later.